All right, your questions are in, and we've got a great batch of them today. It's time for Ask the Captain. First question is from Madridista4746. I have a question about V1. Is it really safer to go up in the air with a major or catastrophic problem than staying on the ground? Well, that's exactly what V1 is about. It's a decision speed. It's a go, no-go speed. So when I get to V1 on my airspeed indicator, the computer actually calls out V1, and I know that I can't stop the airplane in the remaining runway I have in front of me. I must go flying. If I have some sort of malfunction, even an engine failure, I'm going to go airborne after V1. If I try to stop, I won't have enough runway in front of me. So going off the runway is much worse than going airborne. And that's kind of the trade-off that you have there. I'm also trained, every time I go down to training, I'm trained in what's called a V1 cut. Right at V1, I lose an engine. So I'm trained to keep the airplane's pointed straight, to lift it off smoothly off the runway, and then to climb out. Usually we go runway heading to 3,000 feet, but it is much preferable to staying on the ground even with a catastrophic problem. But that's a great question. All right, Prima93 writes, what is the point of providing a flotation device on an aircraft instead of a parachute? Shouldn't there be parachutes on all airplanes underneath every seat? Okay, imagine, now just follow this. Imagine in your mind's eye, the pilot commands an evacuation airborne with your parachute. Do you know how little attention people pay to putting on the flotation device? There's a famous picture of the Sully landing on the Hudson, where there's people out in the life raft, and the one flight attendant has their flotation device around their neck pointing up this way. It's not even strapped around here. And that's the person who tells you how to use the flotation device. So again, the idea of getting people to actually put on a parachute, jump out of the airplane and open the parachute to a successful outcome, that's why there's no parachutes on airplanes. Okay. I don't even have one. Yeah, it's not going to work, but that's an interesting question. All right, Urank JJ writes, how is the total number of humans on board, in quotes, not already available and accessible to ATC? Wouldn't it be available prior to takeoff? The answer to that is yes, it is available and accessible, but not immediately. They're going to have to go in and look up the flight, find out the manifest number and the total number of people on board. The reason that they ask the pilots for the souls on board or the total humans on board is so that they can cross-check that with the paperwork. And let's say the pilot says 285, and then they bring up the manifest and it says 285. Okay, there's no discrepancy. They know they're looking for 285 people, and they have to account for all 285 people once that airplane lands. And let's say there's an evacuation and you've got people all over the airport. It's quite an ordeal. It's like herding cats. But that's why it's just a redundancy thing. Could they look it up? Yeah, but they want to get the confirmation from the pilots. Good question. In Cuba, Torque writes, I hear a lot of both pilots and ATC use the word heavy after the aircraft ID. What does that mean? That's a great question. I've flown heavies for most of my career. If an airplane is over 300,000 pounds of gross weight, it will be classified as a heavy, to put it in a turbulence category for other airplanes that are following it. So only in the terminal area, when I'm departing and I'm landing below 10,000 feet, do I use the expression heavy. That's to let other airplanes behind me that are close in trail know that they might experience some wake turbulence and they might want to give it a little more distance behind me. The only exception to the heavy rule in the 300,000 pounds was the Boeing 757. It was about a 250,000 pound aircraft, but it created such a wake turbulence behind it that they gave it the heavy nomenclature, and I used it every time I flew a 757. Now you know. All right, there's a little trivia for you. All right, we've got Charles Ozulu, 7283. Why do business class seats have a chest belt, but economy seats don't? I've seen those, and it's not every business class seat has one of those. Some of them do, and some of them don't. To be honest with you, I don't know why. I think sometimes it's the way the seat is facing, because some of the business class seats face backwards, some face forwards, and some are kind of sideways, but I really don't know. I've seen those on some airplanes, and on others, they don't have them. So again, that's a good question. I'd Chat GPT that one, if I were you. All right, Soonerbird65. I'm curious about how much unseen damage is done to a large airliner in severe turbulence. How well are they inspected afterwards? That's a great question. Whenever there's any sort of a major turbulence event, the airplane goes in for inspection. They open up all the panels. They get in there with flashlights. They're looking to see any sort of signs of any sort of torquing or any sort of stress to the metal. Then the airplanes go in periodically, and I want to say every few years, and they get a total overhaul, and they open up those same panels. They actually x-ray the spars of the aircraft, which is what holds the wings on, and some other areas of the aircraft to make sure that there's not some unforeseen metal fatigue. So they really do take all of that very seriously. The people that do the inspections are very competent, and I'm very confident in the airplanes after they've been inspected. So you should be too. All right. Very, very good one. All right. The next is Handsome Nerd 6041. Captain Steve, what about landing heavy? Does that introduce any additional complications? Yes, it does. In fact, I've got a checklist for landing overweight. I don't want to land overweight, but if I've got an emergency that forces me to land overweight, I can. I'll just work through that overweight checklist. One of the primary things on it is to make sure I've got enough runway in front of me to bring the aircraft to a full stop. So if I don't, then I've got to lose some weight or I got to find a longer runway. Can you land an airplane overweight? Yes. Will it do damage to the airplane? No, not necessarily. Do you want to have as smooth a touchdown as you can? Yes. If I have a real forceful landing and I'm overweight, I'm going to write it up. I'm going to put it in the maintenance logbook. They're going to have to go in and do an inspection on that airplane. But those are all things that the checklists point me to and get me to consider before I do an overweight landing. I, as a captain, have to weigh getting on the ground sooner rather than later against the damage to the airplane that might be done in an overweight landing. I'm kind of the school of let's get the airplane on the ground and let's take a look at the airplane later. You know, that's where I'm coming from. Julie Keener writes, could the flight attendants have been trying to secure larger service items, carts, first, or are they trained that in a lower priority than securing themselves? This is a lower priority than securing themselves. It just depends. If I get on the PA and I say, flight attendants, take a seat, I've already briefed them before you even boarded the airplane. If you hear me get on the PA and say, take a seat, don't do anything else. Take a seat. I want them to sit down and strap in right away. They're going to leave the carts out in the aisle if they have to do that. I'm concerned for their safety. Most of the time, I will call the purser, the number one flight attendant, and I will say, start your moderate turbulence procedures. That means to them that they need to put all their stuff away, lock it up, make it sure everything is secure, and then take a seat. So that's the priority with moderate turbulence procedures. I don't do that over the PA. I do that over the intercom directly with them. But if you ever hear a captain come on and say, flight attendants, take a seat, you better get your seatbelt fastened too, because that's serious. All right, I've got Ken Vogel, K8W. What do the pilots do with the numbers they receive from load closeout for weight and balance? So as we're taxiing out, sometimes you'll hear the pilots say, we don't have our numbers yet. And that means they haven't gotten a load closeout. And in a load closeout, I get my total gross weight, I get my flap setting, I get my zero fuel weight, I get if there's any restricted articles on board, any chemicals or lithium batteries or anything underneath the airplane that I need to know about, any live animals underneath the airplane. I get all sorts of information on that load closeout. Then my co-pilot pulls that up, takes a look at it, and he briefs me on what's called the weights, winds, and temps. So he's going to look at the weights of the aircraft to see if it's in line with what our power setting. And he goes, yep, we're good with the weights. The winds are down the runway, or we've got a predominant headwind. If we have a tailwind for some reason, and it could be a surprise last minute tailwind, he'll go pull up new numbers for a 5 or a 10 knot tailwind. I can only handle a 10 knot tailwind, nothing more. If it's over that, I got to pick another runway. So he'll do weights, winds, and then the temperatures. As long as the temperatures were in a certain range, he briefs me on all that. I look at all my numbers on my screen. I got the power to take off. Everything is good. Then we finish the checklist. We're prepared for takeoff. That's what happens when the numbers come out. Great. Excellent question. All right. I've got K Cat Slave 4978. How does the airline react to flight attendants who get injured after disregarding a cockpit directive to buckle in? Are they disciplined when they get injured and miss work? I don't know the answer to that. I hope not. I think you probably learn the lesson if you don't do that. It's kind of a teaching lesson, you would hope. But, maybe an encouraging word or a not so encouraging word later on might help make sure you don't do that again. But I don't think they get actually disciplined for that. They get taken care of. Yeah, good question. Next question is Kevin McD 112. Why is it always rough when flying into KLAS, that's Las Vegas, from the east? Is it because of the mountains, or does it have something to do with the desert climate? Yeah, it has to do with both. You're coming in over mountains when you come into Las Vegas, and all the thermals coming up from all the heat from the desert will cause a lot of bumpiness coming in. And when I'm flying up front, it's like this. You're kind of doing it. You're trying to control the bumpiness as you're coming in, but yeah, it has a lot to do with the heat, and especially some of the mountain wave, it's called. That'll cause some issues with airspeed and so forth. But you'll feel it back there like this. And then when you get closer to the runway, you feel, kind of this. And that's from just the heat vectors that are coming up off the hot surface. Excellent question. All right. Brian Felt 9590. Steve always says that reliance on radios is an old technology. Is there another option? Do ATCs outside the U.S. use some other technology? The answer is yes, there are other technologies. And yes, some ATCs outside the U.S. use those, and some inside the U.S. use those. They've been around for a lot of years. It's called CPDLC, and it's Controller Pilot Data Link System, and it's like texting. They can send me a text to my screen. I just accept it or I reject it, and then I can even load it. If it's like a clearance, I can even load it into my computer. It's really a wonderful system. All the stuff that used to take a long time to explain on the radios, they can just send to me via text. I'm of the mind that a lot more could be sent via that system than actually talking on the radios. I think you should only talk on the radios either to clarify something that you got on a text or some sort of an emergency, and that should be it. You should be able to send virtually everything through the box. I think it would cut down on radio confusion, people stepping on each other over the radios. I think it would make things a lot safer, but we're working towards it, just not there yet. All right. We got Lean W. Comb 85. I always keep my seatbelt on from takeoff to landing. Do you think they will make this compulsory in the future? You can't make anything compulsory. If you tell people to keep their seatbelt on for the entire flight, nature calls. They're going to have to get up and go to the bathroom. People are going to want to stretch their legs. And there's just some people that have a compulsion to unbuckle that thing as soon as they can. I don't know why. I don't know if they don't like the authority of it, or they just, somehow they in their mind, they think it's too confining. The biggest danger is that overhead right above you. And what I'm telling you is keep that thing, even if it's loosely fastened, you don't want to come flying out of that seat. So do me a favor, keep the seatbelt fastened. That's a great question. Derek W. 9405. Is it true that extremely overweight passengers have to purchase 2 tickets? If so, how is that determined or enforced without hurting feelings? I don't think that's a thing. I've heard of that on occasion. I don't know if it's an urban legend or if it's maybe was an airline that has done that. I don't really think that they do that on a normal basis. And yeah, you would hurt somebody's feelings, I think, if you did that. That's a tough one to even comment on, just because I don't have any experience in that. I'm not an agent and I'm not a flight attendant. That's really not my venue. All right, final question. Idadarati 123 writes, when I've asked flight attendants for an extension, they announce to everyone around me, here is your seatbelt extension. Is this some kind of airline policy, or are they deliberately fat shaming passengers? No, I don't think anybody's deliberately fat shaming anybody. And you know what? Could they be more discreet about that? I would be. I would try to be. I know there's probably some sensitivity there, and nobody wants to have to ask for a seat belt extension. There are extenuating circumstances on why somebody might be overweight. I've got several friends that have thyroid issues and they've got other physical issues, and they just can't take off the weight, and they've tried. So it's not for a lack of trying, but I think, I apologize. If somebody did that to you and it was embarrassing, I do apologize. If it was good old Captain Steve, I wouldn't. I just kind of discreetly walk up and I'd sort of hand it to you and I'd walk away, right? And we let that be enough. All right, folks, great questions this week. Really, really wonderful ones. I hope you got some insight to some stuff now that goes on in airplanes and how you fly. And keep the questions coming, because yours might make it onto the next episode of Ask the Captain.